Okay, hi everybody. I think we're now live. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Elizabeth Brooke, and I'm an International Student Advisor here at Stony Brook University. So the topic for today's workshop is the top 10 things you should know about the F1 visa interview. I know there's a lot of kind of mysterious things about the visa interview, like what goes on, how do consulate officers make their determinations. So we are lucky enough to have Mandy from Argo with us today. She has over 7 years of experience working as a U.S. diplomat and consular officer for the U.S. Department of State at U.S. embassies and consulates in China, Mexico, and Hong Kong. Mandy is also a U.S. immigration attorney who started her own law practice after leaving government service. She has interviewed over 100,000 business executives, students, tourists, and immigrants, all wishing to travel or live in the United States. She's the executive vice president at Argo, the world's first company consisting of former U.S. consular officers who will provide one-on-one guidance to clients to ace their visa interviews. So I heard Mandy speak on this topic about a month ago and was so impressed and thought that this would be a great resource for you all. So I invited her here. Now Mandy has agreed to leave time at the end for questions. So please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll read them aloud at the end for Mandy to answer. So try to keep the questions pretty general. Any really specific questions can be directed towards your visa advisor, your VIS advisor. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mandy to Stony Brook.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's so great to be speaking to international students who are interested in studying in the United States. I still think that the US has the best education in the world, and we definitely welcome you guys back. It has been such a crazy year last year, and I think that things are looking up for this year, and I hope some of you will be coming back this fall. I am going to share my screen right now and just my presentation on the F1 student visa process.
Awesome. Now, while you're doing that, Mandy, I thought we could take a quick break and take a poll so we have a better idea of who's joining us today. Margaret, would you launch the poll? Okay, the first question, do you currently have an upcoming visa appointment? So our answers are yes, I have a visa appointment. No, not yet, but I'm planning to make a visa appointment before the start of fall. Or no, I already have my F1 visa. So if you guys can go ahead and answer that question, and then we can share the results and give Mandy a better idea of who she's talking to.
Wow, this is really exciting, the live poll and seeing the numbers come in.
Yeah, I know. The webinar feature, it's kind of hard. You don't see the students' faces. It's kind of hard to get an interactive piece. So, the poll, I think, will give us some feedback.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll give it another minute. And then Margaret, you can share the results. All right, what do we have? Okay, cool. So we have the majority of participants today have not yet made the visa appointment, but they're planning to. All right, very good. We have one more question just to give us a better idea of who we're talking to. Margaret, could you launch that poll? Okay. Okay, are you currently in F1 status? So that means, did you currently arrive here to the United States and get F1 stamped in your visa passport, in your visa? So yes or no?
Yeah, it really feels like that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. This is an easy question. So I think we'll share our results. Okay, no. All right, great. So most of the people on this webinar are new students, initial students. So that should give you a good idea of who we're talking to. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Margaret.
Absolutely. This is really interesting and good for me to know as well. And I think that hopefully today's presentation will be really helpful to new students. I think for new students, you might be navigating the visa process for the first time. And that's always my favorite audience to talk to because then I'm sort of catching you before you make any sort of mistakes or, had any prior refusals or things like that. Okay, so today's presentation is called The Top 10 Things You Didn't Know About the F1 Visa Interview Process from the perspective of an ex-visa officer who has spent a lot of her time interviewing international students. I've approved so many students. I've also denied a lot of students. I'll just give myself a brief introduction. So, as Elizabeth mentioned, I'm a former US diplomat and also a US immigration attorney. And before I was an immigration attorney, I worked for the US State Department as a diplomat for close to 8 years. I spent 2 years at the US Embassy in Beijing, China. And here's a couple of fun photos that I included. This is when then Vice President Joe Biden came through the embassy, and the diplomats had the pleasure of meeting him. It was a really nice opportunity to speak to him, and I'm excited to see him in the White House. And then after Beijing, I spent 2 years at the US consulate in Matamoros, Mexico. And there I encountered a lot of border issues, which was really interesting. And I found out that a lot of international students sometimes, instead of going back to their home country to apply for, visa renewals, they like to go down to the border to Mexico. And so it was like a whole new set of student issues there. And finally, I spent time at the US consulate in Hong Kong and Macau, where not only did I spend time doing non-immigrant visas like student visas and tourist visas, I also spent time managing the immigrant visa and the green card unit. And so have a lot of experience with immigrant visas as well. So this second photo is from my time in Hong Kong when I was the MC at the 4th of July celebrations. So one of the fun parts about being a diplomat overseas is you get to partake in these US celebrations, and we would always throw a big party every 4th of July and invite all of our local contacts. And the man standing behind me is the consul general, which is basically the version of the US ambassador in Hong Kong. And so now I work for a company called Argo. It's a company that I'm really, really passionate about. It's very near and dear to my heart because it's a company made up entirely of ex-visa officers who, all like me, have spent years interviewing visa applicants. And oftentimes we were very surprised by how unprepared people were for their visa interviews. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't realize how short it could be and how important of a decision it is for them if, an international citizen has plans in the United States, whether it's to study for 4 years or for, summer travel or, for employment, like eventually getting the H-1B or the L-1 visa or the E-visa. So we started this company in 2019, and basically what it is it's a website, so argovisa.com, and people go to this website and they can get connected with a former visa officer to help them prepare for their visa interview. And so this is where all of our Argo officers have worked when they were diplomats with the Department of State. So as you can see, we have a lot of officers who have worked in China, in India, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Canada, Africa. I mean, we've just been everywhere. And I think hopefully it is Argo's goal someday to have a Argo officer who, in every country where we have an embassy or consulate. And so right now we have 27 Argo officers. We speak 15 different languages including the major languages like Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and we have worked in 34 countries around the world. And so let's talk really candidly a little bit about the visa interview process. Why is it that it can sometimes be a tough process for people? Well, the first thing is that generally people are very nervous when they go through the visa interview process, and I think that's totally understandable. For a lot of people, it's the very first time that you are speaking to a US government official. You're looking at them through this bulletproof glass. You're it's a very short interview, so you want to make a good impression. So sometimes, people definitely are nervous, and I've seen this a lot with international students. Oftentimes there's language and cultural miscommunication and misunderstanding. And so, usually our visa applicants coming from whatever country where we're working, they still are not that familiar with American culture. Whereas American consular officers, usually what we do is we learn a foreign language with the government. We spend 6 months to a year learning a new language. Then we will move overseas to a foreign country, and all of a sudden, maybe within weeks time, start interviewing visa applicants. So for us, we're really getting to know the culture, and oftentimes there is language and cultural misunderstanding. And I always like to tell this story, this extreme example of cultural misunderstanding. When I was working in Mexico, I had the opportunity to go to China for a temporary assignment, and I worked at the US consulate in Chengdu for a month. And we had young couples who were coming to the window. And I remember the first couple that came to my window, they were telling me about how they had just gotten married. They were going to go on their honeymoon. They were really excited, but they had brought their parents with them or in-laws with them. And they said, yeah, like my mom and dad are coming with me on my honeymoon. And I have refused at least 3 or 4 couples with that trend, thinking, because in American culture, there is no way that you would bring, your parents or your in-laws with you on a honeymoon. But after I noticed this trend in the interview process, I stopped, I talked to our local staff, who are basically locally employed colleagues who work in the embassy or consulate, but they're from China. And they were like, you know what? This is actually quite a common trend in Southwest China. Young people get married, they want to go, far away for their honeymoon, like to Hawaii. And their parents, even though they really want to travel to the US, they don't really speak English very well. So they don't feel comfortable doing that on their own. So the young people bring them along as a way to thank their families, for their support over the years. So it's actually quite common in China. So once I recognized that, obviously, my decision making definitely changed. But it is so easy to have that cultural misunderstanding when you're speaking to an American officer, and if they don't really understand the culture very well. And I'm embarrassed to say I'm Chinese American, so I probably should have known that. And even then, I was encountering these issues. Another thing is that you really cannot rely on your documents. One thing that I, as a visa officer, saw over and over again when I was doing this type of work is that visa applicants love to rely on their paperwork. Instead of talking to the visa officer, they just want to shove all of their documents across, under that slot through the window and say, you know what, you don't even have to talk to me. Just look at my papers. It's all in there. I'm fine. Just approve me the visa. Well, I can tell you that visa officers hate looking at documents. And number one, we don't have time to do it because we have so many people that we have to interview. But number two, we are actually reprimanded by our supervisors. All of my consular managers used to walk around looking at what the visa officers were doing, and they would say, no documents, no documents. And the reason is because we know that documents can be forged. If you go outside of any embassy or consulate around the world, generally there's a black market. They're selling fake documents, they're selling invitation letters and bank statements. And so for visa officers, the most important thing is the visa interview itself and not the paperwork. So don't be surprised if you go to your visa interview and your visa officer says, you know what, I don't want to look at anything. I just want to talk to you for a few minutes, because that is generally how we think about these things. Also, consular officers, visa officers, were extremely overworked, and we do have limited information on your case. And so when I was working at the US Embassy in Beijing, on average, every single day, this was before the pandemic, 4,400 people would come through our waiting room, and every single person would have to be fingerprinted. and interviewed. And so on average, I was interviewing about 150 visa applicants a day. And that is a lot of people to talk to. And in fact, on average, your visa interview will only last about 3 minutes. So it's really important that you make the right impression and that you are prepared for this very short but crucial interview. It can also be extremely high stakes because if you get refused a visa, maybe there was cultural misunderstanding and the visa officer didn't understand your situation. um, it becomes harder and harder to get your visa approved the more times you have been refused. And this is because every single time you interview, there will be notes that are taken in the system that will be accessible to the next visa officer who talks to you. So, if you get refused once, I would definitely recommend that you work with an expert to understand why you were refused the first time instead of going back and trying over and over again with the same situation, because it's likely to give you the same result. Okay, so if we want to look at some numbers, I specifically chose 2018 because this was before the pandemic. Last year was very strange because there were so few visa appointments and everything was shut down because of the coronavirus. So in 2018, there were 363,000 student visas that were issued. And this is all information that you can get on the State Department's website. There were 195,000 student visas that were refused in 2018. And so this number includes both um, visas that were outright just refused, you're not approved, but it also includes, 68,000 where students just had additional processing that had to be done. We call it administrative processing. So this is cases that are in pending status where the visa officer couldn't make a decision right at that moment whether or not to approve or deny your visa. So, on average, around the world, the refusal rate for student visas is about 35%. But if you were to go to individual posts, it could go as high as 60 or 70% even. So, even though people now call this process visa stamping, like it's just a rubber stamp, the numbers show that it's far from the truth. It's definitely not a rubber stamp process. And that is why it's so important to be prepared. And in fact, even before the pandemic, student visa issuances have been on the decline for the past 5 years. And so, this could be due to a number of reasons. And I think it actually got harder during the previous administration, where consular officers were harder on student visa applicants. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the 10 things that you didn't know about the F1 visa interview process. So, number 10 is that consular officers are not attorneys. So, I say this because there are so many students where when they do get refused a visa or they have complications in their case, the first resource that they usually go to are US immigration attorneys, which makes sense because immigration attorneys play a very important role in immigration and visas to the United States. However, they may not be the best people to help you prepare for the visa interview itself. And one of the reasons is because immigration attorneys are not actually allowed to go into visa interviews with their clients. This will always be an interview that you have to do on your own. So you have to be prepared. And secondly, attorneys, I'm an attorney myself, so I definitely admit this. We like to be very clear on the law. We like to use persuasive writing, documents, letters that we help clients with to give to the visa officer. And remember what I said earlier, visa officers don't like to look at documents. They don't like to look at anything. They want to talk to you and understand the situation. And because they are not attorneys, they don't think in the same way. So it's really important to understand how visa officers think and make these decisions. And that's what we do at Argo Visa. Number 9 is that decisions by your visa officer is final in that moment. So this actually means that if your visa officer decides to refuse your visa, not not even their managers or their supervisors can, go back into the computer system and change their decision. So the visa officer their decision is ultimately going to hold. And this is called the doctrine of consular non-reviewability for immigration attorneys. And it really gives immigration attorneys a lot of headaches because the decisions are so final. And this is why those few minutes in front of your visa officer are extremely important. Number 8 is, even if you're able to get your student visa, when you come over to the United States, this is something I always want to tell international students: make sure that you don't get into any trouble. And by trouble, I mean anything that could get you arrested, fingerprinted, because guess what? As soon as you get fingerprinted, that information will make its way back to the State Department and the embassy and consulate where you are applying next. And you will likely have a lot of problems getting your next visa approved. Sometimes international students think, whatever happens in the United States, it's not going to affect their visa. But we actually, have a database that we cross-reference with the FBI. So if you get fingerprinted and arrested, we will find out about it and you will have to address it at your next interview. And I always like to tell international students this because when you're going away to school for the first time and you are excited, you're living away, you have new friends, possibly American friends, and everybody is, drinking and having a good time, just keep in mind that your situation is not necessarily the same as your American roommates. And one bad decision could really affect your visa status in the future. I have seen a lot of students go through this, whether it's getting a DUI, which is driving under the influence, or maybe they get arrested for shoplifting because they thought it would be funny to do something crazy for once. uh, Try not to make bad decisions, because I think for the US government, if you're a visa holder, you will always be seen as a guest in the country. And if you sort of abuse that privilege, it will make it more difficult for the visa officer to issue you your next visa. Okay, number 7 is that refusals are difficult to overcome. So, you know, at the State Department, we like to say that every time you apply for a non immigrant visa or a temporary visa, so this includes F1 visas or J1 visas, you will be getting a fresh look at your application. I think that is true in theory, but in reality, sometimes it can be difficult to get a fresh look. And this is because when somebody who has been refused a visa comes to my window, for example, if I know the last visa officer who interviewed them, I might go talk to them and say, "Hey, do you remember this person that you denied a visa to last week? Why did you deny it? What were your thoughts? Your notes said this, but I'm curious." So this is why it's so important to get your interview right the very first time and not have a problem with it, because sometimes it might be your word against, you know, the consular officers, because we all talk to each other. Visa officers all have lunch together. Sometimes we hang out together on the weekends. We talk about cases. And so, it might be hard to get the visa officer to make a different decision from that of their friend or colleagues. Of course, it's not impossible. If you're somebody who has been refused a visa before, definitely work with one of our ex visa officers at Argo. We can help you understand why you were refused, and whether or not that's something that we can help you turn the situation around. Maybe there was misunderstanding. But I would not recommend that you go in and try the same thing again, because the next visa officer will look at all of the notes from the previous officer and also probably ask you, is there any new information? And if you don't have any new information or any circumstances that have changed, it's likely that they'll refuse your visa again. Okay, number 6 is that the INA Section 214B covers everything. So if you or someone has ever been refused a US visa, you know that they probably got a piece of paper that said, "Hey, you've been refused under Section 214B." And, a lot of people think that, okay, this is specifically because I have a lack of ties. I wasn't able to demonstrate to the consular officer that I have adequate ties in my home country. But in reality, Section 214B covers everything. So under our immigration law, you are actually presumed to be an intending immigrant until you're able to convince the visa officer in those few precious moments that you are not. And so, Section 214B could be anything from, this person is young and never traveled before, or maybe they didn't really dress like a student and they seemed like, they didn't really know what they were going to go do in the US. They were not clear on their intentions or their motivations or why they're getting their degree. It could be because, this person says that they're going to go study philosophy in the US, but they can't even have a 3-minute interview, in English. And I'm really concerned about their English ability. So there are all of these things that are covered by Section 214B that you might not really understand because this is all internal, standards set by the visa officer on exactly who qualifies for a student visa. So this is also why it is important to work with experts to understand, okay, why exactly was I refused? I've had so many students come to me and say, I don't even know why I was refused. The whole interview lasted 30 seconds. They wouldn't even look at my documents and I was refused. And this is also because consular officers or visa officers, we like to make quick decisions that helps us get through the line, that helps us be efficient. And so we are always looking for those quick approvals where clearly somebody seems very qualified, approve in 30 seconds, or somebody who clearly is not um, does not qualify. And so that is a quick 30-second refusal. And so when you are somebody who works at a high volume post, like the embassy and consulates in China or in Brazil or in India or in Mexico, we actually have something called hotkeys where I can press Alt S and refuse somebody in less than a second. And we are always interested in making sure that we keep our numbers up, that we're moving quickly through the visa applicants, and we don't have time to fully understand your situation, which is why it's so important to get it right. Um, and so, if you are somebody who has been refused under 214B for lack of ties, just know it really could have been any number of reasons. And we at Argo can help you dissect it and figure out exactly what caused that refusal. Okay, so number 5 is, what does administrative processing cover? Again, it covers pretty much everything. So, administrative processing basically means that the visa officer is not ready to make a decision on your case right now. Maybe you are missing, important documentation. For example, your I-20, or maybe your passport is about to expire. So, they want you to bring in a new passport. They will put you in administrative processing status, 221G status, until you're able to bring in what is missing. But at other times, it could be because you need special processing because you're studying a sensitive major. It could be because there were red flags that were raised during your interview that made that visa officer want to refer your case to the fraud prevention unit to look deeper into your case and maybe make some phone calls. So it really could be any number of things. And again, because we're the people who have made these decisions, we can help you understand why. Number 4 is that the visa record is for life. So from the first time you come in for your tourist visa, maybe you're 12 years old and you're just going for vacation with your family, to the next time you come back and you want to study in the US for high school or for university, all of that is contained in one long visa record that can be accessible and referenced by your visa officer at your next interview. So this includes, an interview for your immigrant visa / green card if you've decided that you're permanently, going to relocate to the US. This includes your employment-based visas as well, H-1Bs and Ls. All of that is in your visa record. All of that can be looked at by the visa officer. And this is why it is so important to keep your visa record clean and pristine. You don't want criminal issues. You don't want lots of prior refusals that will, give the visa officer doubt whether or not they should issue you the next visa. So this is a really important point. Finally, number 3 is that student visa interviews are almost always conducted in English, even for ESL students. And a lot of students ask me why this is, especially because there are students who want to go to the United States for the purpose of studying English. They're concerned that in their home countries, they don't get enough opportunity to practice. And so to them, it makes total sense that you would go to your visa interview, speak your native language because you're going to go study in the US for English. But that is not really how the visa officer sees it. When we have that short interview with you between 3 to 5 minutes, we want to make sure that you are somebody that will be able to take care of yourself when you're in a foreign country like the United States. If you all of a sudden fly into JFK Airport in New York, we want to make sure that you're not going to have trouble, getting to campus or have trouble communicating where you're going. And if you're somebody who is about to spend 4 years in the United States, we need to make sure that you are serious about your intentions. And part of that intent that we see is that you've already tried to get familiar with the English language. And we want to see that. And so this is why, if you're a student visa applicant, if you come to our window, um, most likely we will be doing that interview in English. And sometimes it can be considered a red flag if the first thing that you say to us is, "Hi, can I speak, Chinese, or can I speak Portuguese, or can I speak, my native language?" And that to us means that you might not be ready to go to the US to study. Okay, so this is something that I mentioned before, that documents are not important. And of course, what I mean by this is not just the basic, most important documents that you need with you as an international student, which is your passport and your I-20. Of course, those are absolutely necessary. But there are other things like housing documents and, letters from your dad's work and, all of these other things. I think it's more important to have a handle on your visa interview to be prepared. If you want to bring documents to your interview, of course you should, just in case the visa officer wants to take a look at it, but don't be surprised if they don't. And so this is, the standard interview checklist for an international student. You want your passport that has at least 6 months validity in it. You want your DS 160 confirmation page. You want a recent passport photo, and you want an I-20. I understand that this year, or starting last year, they started accepting electronic I-20s, which is really nice, because before that, you had to bring the physical version of the I-20, and that was something that students always waited for. And there are also other documents that you can bring. As I mentioned, even though documents are not important, it is a good idea to make sure that you bring things just in case a visa officer asks you for them. And this will happen occasionally. It's rare, but it happens. So, for example, how you're able to afford tuition, plans on how you're planning on paying for tuition, do you have a scholarship? Things like that could be important for the visa officer in case they want to look at it. And at the very least, if you bring everything in, then you won't be put into 221G administrative processing because you're missing something. And at Argo Visa, what we try to do is we help every client make sure they have everything they need for their visa interview, because we know how hectic it could be inside a US embassy or consular section. And what you want is, the fewer people that touches your case, the better it is. You just want that visa officer to approve your case as soon as possible on the spot, so that you have no problems getting that visa in hand a few days later. If you're somebody who's, forgotten your I-20 or forgotten your passport photo or whatever it is, then that officer is going to have to set your case aside, wait for you to send things in. You're going to hope that those documents that you're missing will make it back to your case, and then it'll go through just this extra processing that could cause your case to be lost, and we don't want that to happen. And number one, and the most important advice I can give you, is how you present yourself is so crucial to the visa officer. In those 3 minutes time, how do you seize the visa officer's attention, and get them to listen to you and understand, why exactly you're going to the US? Why are you studying for this degree? What will you be doing afterwards with it? And I think this is where Argo can come in really useful, because We will do mock interviews with you. We will give you feedback. We'll sort of show you what information is relevant and not relevant because, I've seen both ends of the spectrum where visa applicants will sometimes, they just want to come up to the visa officer and they just want to tell you everything, like their whole life story. But a lot of that information is not important and it might, annoy the visa officer. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have visa applicants who come in and they only want to give you one word answers. Why are you going to the United States? Study. Okay. What will you be studying? Business. And there is nothing more painful for a visa officer than to have to ask 5 questions just to get one, response, one concrete response out of, the student. And so it's important to find a balance between the two where you're telling the visa officer information that they need to make their decision, and not say too much or too little. And so this is something that we help you with. So this is actually the agenda for our first student visa week, which happened last week. And I realize, this is some of these Facebook Live discussions, you won't be able to participate, but keep in mind that you can go to Argo Visa for USA on our Facebook page, and all of those events that we had last week for our first student visa week are all in there. And so you can rewatch the videos. We had a panel of 4 visa officers last Thursday, and that was, I think, the highlight of the week, where visa officers who have worked in China and Brazil and Mexico and Colombia and France, we all get together and talk about our experiences and our most memorable visa interviews, and give insights to students on how they can succeed at this important process. There's also a video. There was an update on what's going on behind the scenes at the US embassies and consulates from around the world. And I also had a really fun discussion with an international advisor and DSO at Miami-Dade College. And so, these are all resources that Argo, we wanted to put out there because we want to help international students be successful in getting to the United States and achieving their goals and dreams of getting that education. And so I hope that you will check us out on all of our social media channels. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have YouTube. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope that it was helpful for everyone, just to sort of see this snapshot of what life is like behind the visa window from somebody who did this so much. And it was the hardest job I ever did.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I really appreciate your expertise. I
Yeah.
love that story about the couple who brought their parents on their honeymoon.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And it was so sad because, my first inclination was like, clearly these people are lying to me, refused,
Yeah.
and only to find out that I was actually in the wrong. And unfortunately, that happens a lot for visa officers. We find out information later and we're not able to go back and fix, the mistakes that we made before.
Right. Oh my gosh, it sounds like such a pressure-filled job having to make such an important decision in such a short time period.
Mm. Yeah, and we know how important this decision is to each person. And sometimes, and that's why I think with Argo, this is a dream that consular officers used to have when we were working at the visa window. Like, why isn't there somebody out there giving true and honest and accurate information to students so that they're not, making mistakes or causing all of this miscommunication? And so this is really how Argo came about. And we want to help you avoid the mistakes that we used to see over and over again at the window.
Definitely, definitely. Thanks so much. So I guess now we'll transition to some questions and answers. So we'll just give Mandy a minute. I know you were talking for a lot. While you catch your breath and while we get our questions ready, I just want to share with you guys my screen. Let me see here. Okay, my screen sharing does not seem to be working. Here we go. Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen with you all and show you our website really quick, because we do have resources on our website for new students, especially right here applying for a new visa. So, Mandy's expertise is unparalleled. So that is definitely something that you guys should look into if you have really burning questions about the visa interview, is contact Argo. But we do have some kind of general things here that you can definitely check out. Also, if you need to contact us, you can make a virtual appointment on our website right here, schedule a virtual appointment, and pick a slot that works for you, and you will have a meeting, a Zoom meeting with a VIS advisor. So, we're here for you with all your questions. Think of us as your GPS, your ways. You have to do the driving, but we're here to help and guide you. All right. Thanks, guys, for attending. So now I'll hand it over to Margaret and Laura, who will moderate our question and answers.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today, and please join me in giving Mandy a big virtual round of applause for her time and presentation today. So we are going to go ahead and dive into the question and answer section. As a reminder, we have limited time. We have about 10 to 15 minutes to answer questions. So unfortunately, we won't be able to get to everyone's question today, but we will go ahead and try to ask some of the more frequently asked questions that were submitted. And again, if you have a very specific question to your specific situation, please feel free to follow up with your VIS advisor. So we'll go ahead and get started with the first question. The first question, is it a risk for me to request entry to the US with a valid F1 visa that was issued for me under a different CVIS ID number?
Okay, so the question is it, sorry, can you repeat that? Is it a
Sure.
problem?
Is it a risk for me to request entry to the US with a valid F1 visa that was issued under a different CVIS ID number?
I don't think so, but I think you should be very clear that you have a current I-20 and that the I-20, gives you duration of status in the United States, and make sure that you explain that to the CBP officer. So again, CBP officers are humans, and so sometimes, they make decisions based on the responses. So I think it's good to be prepared on how you would respond if they ask you that question.
Okay, our next question, this one was submitted several times. Does having a tourist visa impact my ability to does it affect my ability to apply for a student visa?
It does not. And actually, if you have had a tourist visa before or have a current tourist visa, that usually to visa officers is a good sign, because it means that you've traveled to the US before, you have used your visa wisely, you have the means to go for tourism. So it's a good sign for us.
Okay, the next question, this was covered a little bit in your presentation, but if our visa gets rejected, what should we do next?
My recommendation is, if you've already been refused a visa once, um, it's best to work with an expert to understand why you were refused the first time. I mentioned this during my presentation, but you don't want to go into your visa interview, exactly the same as you did last time, with exactly the same, responses, without understanding what exactly the visa officer was thinking when they refused your visa. So for prior refusals, it's a really good idea to work with Argo.
Okay, our next question is about the closure and emergency appointments for different issuing posts around the world. If the consulate is currently closed or accepting emergency appointments, what should we do in this situation to try to arrive on time for fall?
Yeah. So it's always important to first have a visa interview before you apply for an emergency appointment. So, the State Department has already stated that it will prioritize student visas. And usually summer is the busiest time at embassies and consulates, because all of the students are going back to school, first-time students are coming in. So they do prioritize student visas, and they've made that very clear. If you're able to get a visa appointment, even if it is after the start date for your classes, sign up for that visa appointment so then you can request the expedite. You always need a visa appointment first.
Oh, sorry, Mandy, go ahead.
Oh, no. The other thing I wanted to add is that we have heard that just a couple of days ago, the US Embassy and consulates in China have released visa appointments for students. So if you are a Chinese student who's applying, now there should be more availability. And so you should definitely try to check every day to make sure that you get a timely visa appointment. And if not, get that appointment anyways, sign up for emergency expedite, and students do not need national interest exceptions to go back to the United States. And also the travel ban, and this again is specifically for China, has been removed for students.
Okay, speaking about the national interest exception, there was a question asked about that. If I would need the national interest exception, does it apply to continuing students with a program start date on the I-20 before August 1st?
It has to be, your classes have to start after August 1st. Oh, you're saying you're a continuing student, but your
Correct.
classes start before August 1st?
Correct. They're continuing students, so their program start date on the I-20 would be before August 1st.
Okay. So the announcement was very clear that it has to be for classes that start after August 1st. But for returning students, what I would do is, usually on the embassy or consulate, there will be a way to contact the embassy and you can ask them that. And I say this because they may be making decisions differently post to post. So to get the clearest answer for your situation, you should try to contact the embassy or consulate.
Okay, next question. We have a student who is graduate computer science who's asking about the possibility of being put in administrative processing due to his course of study. If there's any suggestions that they should follow during the interview for like STEM majors like that.
Yeah, I think for students who are facing the possibility of administrative processing, I think just keep in mind that to make sure that the materials that you submit are as thorough as possible. There's not really any way that you can game the system. If you need, administrative processing, then you will need it. But as long as you have everything that you need, you can make sure that it goes as fast and as smoothly as possible.
Okay, the next question, this was also asked a couple of different times about which issuing post students should apply to based on their specific situation. If they're living in another country currently, should they travel back to their home country to apply?
Mhm. So, if you're applying outside of your home country, you would be considered what's called a third country national. And those visa interviews tend to be a little bit more difficult. You have to have a good reason why you're applying in a third country. And again, this is where, good preparation for the interview is important because I have definitely seen decisions go both ways. There are times where visa officers will say, okay, this makes absolute sense why this person is applying in a third country. Other times they will say, we can't make a decision on your case. You're going to have to go back to your home country, and they will put your case into 221G pending status. So those few minutes will be really, really important in how you express yourself and, why you're applying in a third country. And that's something that we can help with as well.
Okay, the next question is, what do we do if our visa is not approved for our full course of study, like getting 2 years instead of 4? What should I do in that situation?
Okay. So I think it depends on why the visa was limited to a shorter period. It really doesn't mean anything. It basically just means that if you come over to the United States, you have a 2-year visa, and then it expires while you're here, you're going to have to apply sooner than you would otherwise, and you'll probably just have to reapply. But since you were approved the visa, hopefully there's no issues. But again, I think without knowing more about the situation, I'm not sure why the visa was limited.
Okay, the next question, this was also asked a couple of times. It's similar to the B visa question. If I was previously in the US under another visa status like H, will that have an effect on me applying for an F visa?
It might, depending on the situation. So I think your situation just has to make sense for the visa officer. If you are on an H-1B and you've already graduated from the United States with a bachelor's degree, you work for a while on an H visa, and then now you're applying for another bachelor's degree, you might encounter some questioning. If you're then moving on to maybe a master's degree or a PhD, that might make sense for your career and educational trajectory. So I think it just depends on your personal circumstances, but the visa officer will definitely take that into account.
Okay, another question, if you could explain a little bit more about proving ties to my home country if I have close US relatives or friends, what should I do in order to get my visa approved?
Mm. Yeah. So if you have a lot of friends and family in the United States, it doesn't mean that you're not eligible for a visa per se, but I think it's important to sort of explain explain the relationships in a way that the visa officer will understand it, but also maybe try to focus on your studies and why you are interested in studying in the United States. I think one situation that we used to see as visa officers all the time was just people memorizing these speeches about their studies. And visa officers, because we've been doing this for so long, we can tell right away if somebody has a canned response or a memorized response. So it's really important to be authentic and to be honest, but also in a way that like an American officer can understand it. And I realize that, I hope that kind of answers the question, but I should just also mention that it's really hard to give one size fits all advice because everybody's situation is a little bit different. And sometimes I like to give a lot of flexibility in how, it could be with one situation versus the other, because you don't want somebody to take advice for one situation and apply it to their own situation, even though it's a totally different circumstance.
Okay, so I think we have time for two more questions. So the next question, we had several questions submitted about providing proof of funding, which you previously touched upon, that sometimes documents aren't always looked at. A couple of students are asking what they should be prepared with at the interview and if all of the documents, should match their I-20, and if you could just speak a little bit about students presenting proof of financial support at the visa interview.
Yeah. So I think the thing about documents is just don't rely on them. You should definitely bring everything just in case you're asked for them. But I think it's more important to explain during the interview how exactly you will be funding your tuition. Some people have family support, some people have sponsors, some people have scholarships. So it really just depends. The only thing you shouldn't do is just take those documents and just shove it through the window and expect that to speak for you. The officer is always going to want to know directly from you exactly how you intend to pay for tuition.
Okay, and our last question is how do I get in touch with Argo?
Okay, so that's a great question. So you can go to www.argovisa.com to sign up for a consultation. We have 30-minute consultations just for your standard F1 visa interview, or 1 hour consultations for people who have more problems like prior refusals, or we've dealt with a lot of visa revocation cases with great success. You can also send an email to hello@argovisa.com if you have questions about, whether or not we're able to help with your specific situation. We'd be happy to talk to you and give you our thoughts.
Okay, so everyone again, please give Mandy a virtual round of applause. I will go ahead and turn it back to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I really appreciate all your expertise. Thank you for joining Stony Brook University's virtual webinar. And I wish you all the best. And thank you guys all for attending.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It was a pleasure to be here and to support your international students. And I wish everybody the best of luck with your visa process this year. And we look forward to welcoming you back.
All right, great. Thanks so much, guys. We have a survey if you wouldn't mind filling that out on your way out. But other than that, have a great day and contact us if you have any other questions. Take care. Bye-bye.